We would like to know where all of us are joining us from to appreciate the wealth, of contribution and participation in this webinar. We have someone from the Netherlands, from Thailand. Someone just responded that they come from hashtag 4150702. So I guess that's a mistake. We have a person joining us from Kenya. So the Slido will remain open, so you can keep on responding so that we can appreciate where everyone is coming in from. So we already have about 20 participants who have responded out of the 52 that we have. Maybe we can get to our next question. Very good. So our next question is, how familiar are you with just energy transition? How familiar are you with just energy transition? You can see on your screen as people are responding. Thank you so much. It is important for our panelists to get the feel of our level of knowledge on this subject so that they can simplify it as it can get, so that everyone can have clarity and understanding of what is just energy transition and what it means to our different contexts. Thank you so much for those who have participated in these questions. So we have 48%. We go to the next question. What pops into your mind when you hear the words just energy transition? You can just write one word or two words. Someone is saying it's complex. Someone says what pops in their mind is Indonesia. The person is saying that what pops in their mind is social inclusivity, justice, clean energy, coal, poverty reduction. Very interesting, ethical. Biogas pops into someone's mind. Challenging, fossil, goal, clean energy, coal, and justice have the biggest weight. Improve, it's all about energy. Green energy, integrated partnership. All about energy, EBT. Our last question is, how familiar are you with biogas and its value chain? Because central to our discussion today is the positioning of biodigester solution or technology and biogas in the subject matter of just energy transition. About 38% who have interacted with biogas closely. So much I think we have managed to. Thank you so much to all who have participated in the Slido. We now have a feel of the participants, where you're coming from, our appreciation of the subject matter, just energy transition, and also our appreciation of biodigesters and biogas as a technology and a solution. But we need not worry for those who probably have no clarity on what just energy transition is. We have lined up for us a panel of experts and experienced, people from the field and from the sector who are going to help us dig deeper and delve deeper into this subject to enable us understand what is just energy transition, how do we position biogas in the just energy transition, and all that comes with that. So to start us off, I would want to introduce our panelists who are helping us discuss this subject. I will start with introducing Dr. Soni Gumban. Dr. Soni is an ecological economist. He works on public finance and forest issues. His works on public finance and forest issues have been published, accepted, under review in Nature Sustainability, Forest Policy and Economics, and Conservation Letters. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Leipzig, Germany. He was trained in the issues of environmental appraisal and policy formulation at the New York University of Lisbon, Portugal. In behavioral economics at the University of Mannheim, Germany, and in environmental governance at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, Norway. He is a member of the Indonesian Young Academy of Sciences, ALMI, serving as its current director for grant and partnership. He is also an associate researcher at the University of Indonesia, Research Center for Climate Change in Depok, Indonesia. Since 2017, he is also a senior economist at the World Resource Institute, WRI Indonesia. From 2023, he is now joined the UNDP Indonesia in Just Energy Transition Environment Unit. Kindly everyone just join me in appreciating the presence of Dr. Soni to help us in understanding our subject matter. Next, I will introduce Mr. Charles, Dr. Charles. Dr. Charles will be our panelist. He is currently the policy lead on climate change and energy transition at the Africa Center for Energy Policy, ACEP. His research interests include risk mitigation and investment decisions on utility scale and small-scale renewable energy technologies in Africa, and assessing the economics of biogas investments in Africa. Beyond energy transition, he has worked on several projects in the extractive industry, including natural gas demand and supply dynamics in Ghana, local participation in the oil and gas sector, local labor absorption in oil, gas, and mining sectors, gender-responsive budgeting in mining, and debt drivers in Ghana's economy. Charles holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Finance, Master of Philosophy in Operations, and a Bachelor's degree of Science in Mathematics and Statistics from the University of Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in appreciating the presence of Charles. Our third panelist is Mr. Michael Muvule. Mr. Michael Muvule is an industrial and management systems engineer with over 20 years of experience leading cross-functional teams to deliver quality, innovative products and services. As the Program Director of Biogas Solutions Uganda Limited, the National Implementing Agency in Uganda of the Africa Biodigester Component, ABC 2022 to 2025, in joint partnership with SNV, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, and GIZ. He is dedicated to developing the national renewable energy sectors through a market-based approach. Michael is passionate about working with all sector members to design interventions that improve livelihoods through disseminating renewable energy technologies in a sustainable, eco-friendly manner. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me appreciate and welcome Michael Muvule in the panel. So those are our panelists. And to start us off in this discussion, I would want to welcome Dr. Soni. And Dr. Soni will be helping us to get into a deep dive into the just energy transition subject. And what we want to understand from Dr. Soni's presentation is what is the purpose, framework, and the stakeholders involved in just energy transition, and what do we expect, or what would we see as the main outputs of the just energy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Soni Ngumban. Karibu. Welcome, Dr. Soni.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Really appreciate. Okay, thank you for Rumah Energy and the Biogas Community, South Biogas Community, for inviting UNDP and myself. for this webinar. I'm representing UNDP Indonesia, despite the some of the introductions, and I've been part of the environment unit working on just energy transition, including with partners that is developing framework for the just energy transition partnership. It's also great to be here with some of the colleagues here, and I will use the next 10 minutes. That's what I understood. It's a very limited time to present some of the ideas about just energy transition. The Slido was what has been very helpful to understand some of the challenges that we are seeing when it comes to defining what a just transition or what a just energy transition is. So I present a framework for just energy transition based upon our work, UNDP works, and partners on developing a framework for just energy transition in Indonesia. Next, please. One of the things that we see is a challenge of defining it. To be very honest, there is no clear definition on what a just transition is. Or later, as I delve further, what is just in the just energy transition. And things are changing and new contexts are developing, begging the need to approach somewhat differently about defining it. We try to define a just energy transition into one that, or energy transition can be just provided that the economic, social, and environmental risks and opportunities, so risks and opportunities from the energy transition are shared between stakeholders by considering stakeholders' capacity. One can add equitably to make the case even stronger here before between stakeholders through an inclusive and meaningful participation process and supported by conditions that affirmatively enable vulnerable stakeholders to mitigate the risk and take benefits from the upcoming opportunities. So this is more or less the definition that we propose to the partnership. And now I'd like to invite you to look at the framework. In the slide, someone mentioned that it's a complex thing. It is a complex thing. But more or less what we propose here can be divided into three parts. The principle and standard. That's the first part. The second part is how we sort of integrating the safeguarding part and the just part using a specific method developed for this, usually related to risks and opportunities. And then what is required, when it comes to implementing it. So these are the three chunks of the framework more or less being discussed at the moment in Indonesia. Given the interest of time, I'll only pick some of the part of the frameworks. Next, please. Next slide, please. So if we look at the principles and the standard, there have been some principles and standard used for, say, social and environmental assessments or guidelines, or social and environment and governance guidelines. We think there are three overarching principles: human rights, gender, equality, and empowerment, and accountability. And there are two main principles under this overarching principle that is closely related to the discussion on just energy transition, which is leaving no one behind. That's the first main principle. And the second one is sustainability and resilience, because just energy transition always devolves around the issue of climate change and sustainability. Now, if we try to develop the standard for this, we can see the existing ones include, say, for the leaving no one behind, this will include, standards related to cultural heritage, issues of displacement and resettlement, local and customary communities, And the most, well-known one is the labor and working conditions. When it comes to the discussion on just energy transition, is coming from the labor union, and labor and working condition is front and center in this discussion. Under the main principle two, sustainability and resilience, one can find standards on biodiversity conservation, sustainable natural resource and management, climate change, of course, and disaster risk, community health, safety, security, and pollution prevention and resource efficiency, because it's about transitioning energy from the existing system into something that is more, clean and low carbon. We also introduce new standard here, not really existing in the standard and guidelines as we know it. That is standard number 9, economic development and diversification, something that is emerging in the discussion of climate in terms of response measures under, for example, UNFCCC, or if we look at the Katowice Declaration. This is so central, the standard number 9. Please continue. Next slide, please. Yeah. If we recall on the second part, it's about integrating just aspects into safeguarding aspects. Safeguarding aspects already there, even before we discuss about just transition. Now these two, safeguarding and just, need to be integrated. So consider we have a baseline, a position that we can depart on, and if we have a shock, and transitions always involve shocks. When we retired quite early, say coal power plant or coal-based power plant, then there will be a shock that we see. Some things will be changes, and there are potential negative, risks that will follow or goes with that change or shocks. So the safeguarding parts is basically the very idea of safeguarding is bringing this into the baseline positions. So that's more or less the safeguarding part. Now we want to add, something above safeguarding by looking at what we call residual risk. Risk that is emerging even when safeguarding intervention are already in place. So there will be new risks because this is new issue. And of course, the economic risk of the change of the shocks. And on top of that, if we introduce the notion of opportunities going beyond risk, then we may probably have positive additionality, and these will, alongside the residual risk and economic risk, will define the just transition, the additionality for just energy transition. Please continue. Next slide, please. So if we look at the third part, or the second one, on translating it into programs, and then later on, into implementation requirements. We look at some of the risks and opportunities, see some commonalities among them, and then we come up with some illustrative just transition programs. We have 9 here. Sorry, this is 8, but it's supposed to be 9. For example, just transition programs on robust stakeholder engagement and grievance mechanism. This is very central and important here. We also see increased accessibility, affordability, energy reliability, which is closely related to the issue of biogas. Adequate and fair compensation, gender equality program, workforce development program, social protection, which is closely related to just energy transition, enhancement program of the existing social environmental safeguard, and then promoting circular economy for just energy transition, because of the implication that energy transition may have into the existing way we approach energy production and energy systems. Please continue. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at what I just said about just energy transition framework, then we see some novelties introduced into this framework. One will be the acknowledgement of both risks and opportunities, just going beyond safeguarding while we introduce just. So that's the second point on the novel thing about the framework. So this is not only doing no harm, but also doing better because we introduce also opportunities. I mentioned about residual risk and additionality. So this is another new things that is introduced into the framework. And then uh, we extend the definition of vulnerable groups here into vulnerable stakeholders because the group is not only the groups as we know it, women, indigenous communities, labor union, and so on, but we also see jurisdictions here will be highly impacted. Jurisdictions, provinces, district, municipalities highly dependent on coal resources, on fossil fuel-based energy resources. This will be impacted, and we have to sort of put jurisdictions into vulnerable stakeholders, into part of vulnerable stakeholders. We see also how we introduce the introduction of new standard that is related to economic diversification and transformation, and the shared roles for different stakeholders that can, approach and go and also, perform something as a unified whole for example, working on proposed program for just energy transitions. And for those interested in the conceptual part of this, we try to accommodate the advances in the discussion on justice. We know the principle of recognition, procedural justice, distributive or distributional justice, and even going beyond to the standard ideas about just. We try to accommodate that, and one can see in the proposed just energy transition program as we propose it. Next slide, please. Kevin, please let me know about the time. Now, some reflection on biogas. I have 1 to 2 minutes to go through
Yeah,
this.
you have about 2 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. So if you look at the standard 9, we mentioned it. I think some of our resource person will delve further into this. We see the highly relevant context of biogas in terms of economic diversification and transformation through biogas at scale. We are talking of household, even small scale communities, roles that biogas can best or well positioned to fit into the whole discussion. At the moment in Indonesia, what we call as investment areas, the transmission line, coal-fire early retirement, renewable energy, the base load of the variable ones, or even the value chains hasn't discussed about biogas, but still there are rooms for this discussion, and we see standard 9 is highly relevant for biogas. If we look further, then we see the relevance, among others, on renewable and clean source of energy, pollution, deforestation in the context of South countries like Indonesia. I mentioned of circular economy, uh, income and livelihoods, both from having another source of income, but also reduce household expenses. These are highly relevant if one looks at biogas. Of course, when it comes to programs of just transition, program number 2, for example, increased accessibility, affordability, and higher reliability in rural areas where biogas of very relevance. Just transition programs number 8 for circular economy is also relevant here. If you look at program number 3, number 6, number 5, number 6, these are related to compensation, working areas, and also social protection. But I especially mentioned here, in addition to others, because of the context of social protection in the global south, a somewhat different, when it comes to the more granular discussion on the issues. This is a bit different than, for example, in the global north. So I think biogas can, offer something in this discussion for the context of the global south. I think I have come to the very end of my slide, and I hope that is helpful for our discussion further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soni, for really the great insights that you've shared on helping us to understand what just energy transition is. Indeed, as you have put it, it's complex, given to the fact that even there is no generally agreed definition of what JET is. I think one of the things that really have caught my attention is the element of the principle of leaving no one behind and sustainability. Sustainability and ensuring that there is clearly articulated accountability on what is really just, and how does this transition happen, looking at both the shocks that come with it and looking at also the opportunities. So we are going to get into our next panelist, and I would just want to encourage all of us as we continue listening to our speakers. If you have a question, please feel free to get on our chat box on the Q&A section and just put down your question. We already have one question. We're going to address it after we have all our speakers finished with their presentation. So next, we want to welcome Dr. Charles. Dr. Charles will be looking at the positioning of biogas or bioenergy, biofuels generally into the just energy transition agenda. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me, please.
We can hear you very well, Charles. Please proceed.
Very good. Very good. So my name is Charles Jemfi Ofori, and I'll be looking at the biogas value chain and how we can position that within the just energy transition scheme. Basically looking at the value chain and also looking at Africa's role in how we can benefit economically from this value chain. Okay, so I think we can start. Next slide, please. So my presentation is going to be a pretty short one, but it's going to highlight certain key issues around the value chain. Now, we want to start from Africa's common position on just energy transition. And this actually tells us what Africa is actually saying, and as outlined in the African Union's common position on energy. And basically what the continent is saying is that we've come to a certain point of conclusion that Africa will continue to deploy all forms of its abundant energy resources. And these energy resources could be renewable or non-renewable. And really in addressing issues of energy security, issues of energy poverty. And the key fuels that they are looking at here is natural gas, green hydrogen, and nuclear power deployment. And if you look at the terms of the positioning of AU's position, you realize that it is huge on energy access. It is huge on transitioning to future transitions to other clean energy sources. And what we see is that at the heart of this common position is really to ensure energy security. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the common position and you juxtapose that with the reality, we see that a just transition framework, as presented by our earlier speaker, shows that it goes beyond electrification. Just transition is multidimensional, although these are not specifically captured in our common framework or in the common position as outlined by the African Union. We do not see the multidimensionality of just transition in the position that we have taken. But we need to recognize that just energy transition is multidimensional, and it should involve strategies that will present economic, advantages, economic opportunities to not just to highly skilled people, but to people who are low skilled, who are semi-skilled, and people whose livelihoods could be affected by changes in technologies as a result of the transition. We also have to ensure that to the benefits of the transition, for it to be just, it should not just lead to only greenhouse gas emissions, but it should also translate to poverty reduction. That tells us about the multidimensionality of the just energy transition framework. And in doing that, we need to develop what I would term as a value chain mindset, where we have skills and capabilities that are developed along the value chain, where technologies are not just based on imports, but technologies are developed, value is added, so that we have a lot more people being integrated into the value chain to bring more economic benefits. Thirdly, we need to recognize that beyond electrification, as outlined in the AU Commonplace, we need to recognize that there are several areas that are outside of clean energy, outside of electrification, clean cooking, agriculture, the use of other fuels, that are very much important to even bring about a full and a holistic just transition framework. And these things must be considered in the light of our thinking around just transition. Next slide, please. So the key question is that what is the role then of the biogas value chain? What we see in the biogas value chain is that it provides two key benefits. What we can classify them into the environmental and also the economic. Now, on the environmental front, if you look at the key feedstocks for biogas, you realize that a very good utilization of these feedstock can lead to a lot of waste reduction, in the waste, because some of these feedstock we use are just the byproduct of other processes which could be transformed into energy. Of course, we have emissions reduction potential, especially when it comes to methane emissions. And then we also have the advantage of a cleaner, an integration of a cleaner source of energy. So that really helps us to understand the environmental basis of it. But also within the economic angle, a role of the biogas value chain actually also leads to a lot of job creation along the biogas value chain. If you look at the value chain, we have the construction aspect where we design specific technologies, the biodigesters, at various skills and various levels that people or citizens can be integrated, and that can create a lot of potential for jobs. If you look at the supply of feedstock, that can also be a lot of potential for economic benefits. And of course, the use of byproducts from waste can also provide some form of economic value. And that shows how important the biogas value chain can be in addressing some of the economic challenges that we see, and also to ensure that there is a just energy transition. Next slide, please. But we also need to be mindful of certain key improvements to ensure that biogas systems are improved, to ensure that biogas systems are competitive enough. We need to have a good improvement in the system design. So the design should be in such a way, and when I'm talking about the system, I mean the biodigesters and all of those systems that converts the various feedstock into biogas, that convert the feedstock into biogas. So the system should be designed in such a way that you prevent scum formation, prevent cracks and leakages, and also to enhance the performance of the biogas digester. And also a key issue would also be access to the relevant feedstock at a cost that is not so expensive, to ensure that there's value in the production, and also the quality of the feedstock. We need to ensure that whatever feedstock we are using produce the maximum value of biogas as much as possible. And that can help in ensuring that it is competitive enough and ensuring that people would actually see it as a lucrative sort of livelihood, and it would also improve the demand for it. Next slide, please. Now, on the financing frameworks, now what we see is that climate funds have become a very huge source of financing for most of our clean energy interventions. I'm using the example of Ghana. Ghana, in between 2011 and 2019, received about 45% of its climate financing from bilateral sources, and also about 29% from multilateral sources, and then 12% from global funds. That means that over 85% of our funding sources came from bilateral, multilateral, and other global funds, and then there are other sources of funding that occupy about 14% of the funding. So we see climate funds, global climate funds, becoming a very primary financing framework, which has various advantages that it could be useful in developing, creating some form of seed capital to develop the biogas market, especially when a good case is made for the market. But the downside is also the capacity in accessing these funds. One of the issues that we have seen within this climate financing landscape is the fact that there is the lack of capacity, especially among developing countries, and even in my own home country, in accessing some of these funds, the Global Climate Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, and all of those funds, the capacity in providing the justification to access these funds could be improved. Then also there are competing interests. I mean, there are a lot of people looking out for the interest in trying to access these funds. So to move in bridging this gap, we need to broaden the financial space. We need to look beyond donor funding. We need to look beyond donor funding to look at other sources of funding. And how can we do that? I think we can look at the next slide, please. In broadening our financing framework, we need to also look towards our local financial institutions, our commercial banks, that can also provide financial assistance. But then that also means that we need to ensure that we de-risk the environment to engender their participation. And that means that we need to look at making a good business case for biogas. We have to make a business case that goes beyond just the reduction of CO2 emissions or the reduction of methane emissions, to see how we can make we can improve our turnover, we can improve our profits, we can improve certain things that the key indicators that the financial institution will be looking out for. And that means that we need to create competitive products that will drive demand, and that would also improve and reduce the exposure of the local financial institution to credit risk. The next one really has to do with the realignment of government policy and regulation. If we see the transition as a means for economic development, we can realign our policies and regulations to fit how we can develop along the value chain. And that really means that we need to create an environment for some of these investments to thrive. Government doesn't necessarily need to spend in producing biogas initiatives, but creating an environment for such businesses to thrive would be beneficial for those businesses to work. And most importantly, we also need to have a shared understanding of what just energy transition means for us. And in creating that shared understanding, the key technologies that will help us to transition better, that will help us to improve on our economics, should not be one that may be imported from elsewhere, should not be one that will be best for one country but will not be best for us. So we need to have an understanding of what technologies will drive economic benefits in our own situation, and what technologies, whilst these technologies drive economic benefits, how does it ensure our acceleration to net zero? Those key conversations need to have, and how biogas and other biofuels fit within these conversations are very relevant in ensuring that we have a just transition framework that is fair, that is equitable, and that actually leads to efficient poverty reduction among citizens. I think I'll end here and we'll continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles. That's really, really insightful. You talked about making a strong business case for biogas. You looked at the benefits, both environmental and economic benefits of biogas, as a contributor to just energy transition, but also emphasize that it is important for us to look at quality, of the technologies and the solutions being deployed, and also to enable biogas sector expand by exploring alternative financing options. Thank you for that. We now also invite Mikel Mvule from Biogas Solutions Uganda Limited to continue with that, conversation of what is the position of biogas in the just energy transition. And I believe you'll also be sharing the context of Africa, specifically Uganda and East Africa. Welcome, Mikel.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin. Indeed, it is a pleasure to join you here today. And also a very, very, very nice to follow the previous speakers, because I think they've pointed out some key areas that we're focusing on. So today I'm going to talk about the just energy transition in the context of a developing country like Uganda that has a rapidly growing population and also has a lot of economic challenges. Right now, our GDP per capita is below $600, and it does present some challenges when we're trying to disseminate new technology, but we look at it as an opportunity as well, that we can use these technologies that are available and that work for different contexts to improve the energy transition. Next slide, please. So I would like to put this in the context of the energy mix. Now, for a country like Uganda, our energy mix right now is that almost 90% of the consumption or of the population is using biomass. That is charcoal and firewood. Right now, in terms of consumption, electricity only accounts for less than 2% of that mix. And then the fossil fuels that are at this time all imported fossil fuels account for somewhere in the range of about 10%. So we can see that our households right now consume the largest percentage of biomass, and that accounts for over 70% of the biomass consumption is done by households for cooking. And this is now leading to a lot of energy insecurity, because our forest cover is reducing, availability of wood fuel is no longer available, and it's also causing a lot of climate issues. Next slide. So I just wanted to look at this, and I'm sure this is the same situation that you'll find in a lot of developing countries, where if you look at the graph on the right, it shows our energy sources that I've just described, where biomass takes 90%, electricity is a little under 2%, and imported oil and oil products account for that. But now, out of that 90% of biomass consumption, on the left, you'll see that firewood accounts for 78%, whereas charcoal is 5.6%, and the crop residues are 4.7% of consumption. Now, in 2019 alone, Uganda consumed more than 2 million tons of charcoal. And when we convert this to biodegradable loss, we find out that it's in excess of $6.5 billion. The reason that this is such a concern is that our population is growing so fast. I think the World Bank predicts that by 2050, Uganda will have a population over 100 million. Right now, we're at about 45 to 50 million. So you can imagine our population is going to double in the next few years. yet we have not figured out a solution for our energy crisis. Next slide. So this is why we feel that it's very urgent that we embrace a just energy transition in Uganda for several reasons, including the ones I've just pointed out. We see that energy poverty in Uganda, and I'm sure other developing countries, is very rampant. And in developing countries like ours, it's affecting mainly the cooking sector. So the energy used for cooking and is what is actually driving a lot of the degradation of our natural resources. We find that by 2019, only 15% of the energy used for cooking in Uganda qualified as clean energy. So when we look at the idea that, for example, the Sustainable Development Goal 7 talks about universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030, we realize that that's in less than 7 years. And we wonder how feasible is that goal of an SDG 7 goal by 2030. And we see that it's not going to happen in Uganda unless we take some drastic steps. So for example, we see that the just energy transition means a lot to us in the sense that as we move towards that, we have to build a foundation where we embed justice into the energy transition. So that as we're ensuring the energy transition, we are not leaving anyone behind because, as I mentioned, our population is growing at a very, very rapid rate. And it means that there are a lot of pockets of our communities and our economy that have to be brought on board to move forward as we need for sustainable development. Next slide, please. So as Biogas Solutions, we've tried to put this into a very practical way. We look at biogas as very, very important to an energy transition because it affects many areas, not only of the value chains, but of our economy and of our communities. One, it of course provides clean and affordable energy. It provides organic fertilizer that improves agricultural productivity. It's of course improving the environmental issues in terms of reducing emissions, but also reducing the need to create more deforestation in search of energy. Then, of course, it's also addressing issues to do with family health and sanitation. It's creating employment for a lot of the youth in our community, where, you know, Uganda right now has an unemployment rate in excess of 80%, because the majority of our population is very young and, like I mentioned, is growing at over 5% a year. So those are the key areas we see that biogas can have a big impact on a just energy transition. Next slide. So what does this mean for us? We try to look at it in practical terms. So when we look at biogas dissemination and adoption in Uganda, we look at it that it can really have a big effect in potential applications in a country such as ours. One, it's a very important source to replace firewood, charcoal, kerosene, and all the unclean fuels in terms of clean cooking and lighting. We see that biogas is important it can be, and I'm talking about biogas as a fuel now, is very important in using it to substitute the current fuels that we're using to drive agricultural equipment, which we see agriculture is the backbone of most of our developing country economies. But we can use biogas to power the agricultural equipment for pumping drinking water, for irrigation, for chaffing, for pelletizing, for running milk coolers, for running brooders. And the beauty is we can develop a lot of those technologies locally. with our knowledge, local knowledge, and our local technicians. So that makes it very possible to now spread it out over more users. We see that biogas can be used as a fuel for running internal combustion engines, gas gensets that can create decentralized electricity, that can run refrigerators. And we have not reached there yet in Uganda, but we see that there's a big opportunity that it can also be purified and used as a fuel to power engines that can run vehicles and move us away from fossil fuels. Next slide, please.
And Michael, we have a minute for you.
Okay, I'm trying to go as fast as I can.
Thank you so much.
So while we've talked about biogas as a fuel, but I also think that we need to also consider whenever we talk about biogas and biodigesters, we have to also realize that the bioslurry is very key for developing countries such as ours. It has several benefits. One, it replaces the expensive chemical fertilizers that most of our smallholder farmers can't even afford. Secondly, it's imported, so we have this huge import bill that we cannot sustain. And by producing local organic fertilizers, we can now reduce the production cost for our small farmers. Two, we can place bioslurry to improve soil fertility, soil structure, crop productivity. We reduce our vulnerability to droughts and climate hazards. We're also contributing to all those areas around improving soils, improving productivity. And we see that organic farming is key because it's improving our food and nutrition security while also allowing our farmers to earn better prices, especially when we look at the fair trade models that are becoming more and more increasing. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through this last one. I think this might be the last slide. And this is just to say that the benefits of shifting to biogas, and we have seen it because we've installed 10,000 biodigesters here in Uganda, and we see that having a less carbon-intensive social technical scheme around is creating more resiliency and more democratic energy systems that allow people to make choices around the kind of energy that they want to use in their communities. We see that it's leading to industrial restructuring. We see technological advancements coming around from the use of biogas and bioslurry instead of the imported fuels and imported fertilizers. We see that it's improving poverty alleviation. It's addressing social and environmental justice concerns. And it's transitioning us here in Uganda, albeit at a very low scale, but it's happening. When it's replacing the highly polluted, dangerous fossil fuel-based economy with now a more environmentally friendly, healthy green economy. So in summary, we see that biogas is one, it's renewable, it's a clean source of energy. The generation of the biogas reduces soil and water pollution, which is very important in our situation, but it also leads to reduction of deforestation. We see that the generation of biogas in and of itself produces organic fertilizer, which now is also supporting carbon sequestration as we put the carbon back into the soils. We see that it's simple, it's a low-cost technology that we can develop a lot of it, especially at the smaller scales or the medium scales, even for small and medium industries, we can develop that locally. So that's also encouraging more of a circular economy here, as we see that more people are able to adopt it without the high capital expenditures that come with other technologies. And then it's also a healthy cooking oil for developing areas where people can easily convert their waste into a clean fuel, and then at the same time sequester carbon into their farms and increase their crop productivity yields. So just with those few areas that we're working on, I think that may be my last slide. Next slide, I think, is the last one. And that's just to say that with this simple but effective technology, I think that as more communities around the world, around Africa and around other parts of the world together we can make the energy transition have meaning and have impact for all. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Mikhail. Very, very, clear insights on the context of, Uganda and representing also, developing countries. And it's very clear that it has to really be contextual in terms of understanding what biogas can do, understanding the context of the developing countries, and ensuring that we definitely leave no one behind. I think it is important for us to also know what does this mean to the communities, looking at the community eye, perspective, and to help us in just understanding what just energy transition looks like or is perceived from the community lens. I would want to welcome Dante from Ruma Energy to just help us respond to all the discussions that have been presented by all our speakers and look at it from the social inclusivity and gender equality lens. Welcome, Dante.
Oke, terima kasih. Saya akan menyampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia. Mungkin saya akan lebih memberikan tanggapan atau paparan terkait dengan yang materi dari Pak Sony. Karena memang benar bahwa banyak penelitian yang sudah terkait dengan perubahan iklim. Sudah ada pengakuan juga bahwa ada dampak kerentanan yang tidak proporsional. Dan kelompok paling termarginalkan yang telah berkembang baik secara tingkat nasional ataupun internasional itu sudah banyak studinya gitu ya. Namun kita masih sering melihat atau bahkan saya yang cukup sering ngomongin tentang pemberdayaan masyarakat khususnya kelompok rentan, itu kebijakan program atau proyek terkait perubahan iklim masih belum berhasil mengatasi itu tersebut gitu loh, secara efektif gitu loh. Sering malah justru kesenjangannya tuh semakin banyak gitu kan. Namun pengalaman dan keterampilan yang unik yang dimiliki oleh masing-masing kelompok, terutama untuk kelompok perempuan, kemudian serta kelompok rentan lain itu ada pengalaman-pengalaman atau keterampilan unik yang justru dapat mendukung berbagai upaya pembangunan dan keberlanjutan. Juga sudah ada identifikasi, terus kemudian juga kita sudah tahu seperti yang tadi dipaparkan Pak Sony itu sangat sudah setidaknya mengcapture lah terkait dengan yang disebut dengan kelompok rentan, terus kemudian terkait dengan inklusi sosial gitu kan. Kemudian kita juga tahu bahwa perempuan dan kelompok rentan lainnya itu selama ini masih punya keterbatasan dalam hal khususnya berpartisipasi pada bidang sosial, ekonomi, politik, semakin tidak mampu. Jadi kelompok perempuan dan kelompok rentan lain itu semakin kurang mampu menghadapi bahkan semakin terpapar dampak negatif perubahan iklim. Sementara sebenarnya mereka punya kemampuan dan keterampilan yang unik ya. Namun memang seperti yang tadi disampaikan oleh panelis yang pertama, untuk mencapai ngomongin keberlanjutan, ngomongin keadilan, ngomongin setara, kelompok-kelompok rentan yang sekarang sudah tidak hanya ngomong tentang anak, lansia, teman-teman difabel, perempuan, namun juga sudah melibatkan tokoh masyarakat, tokoh adat, juga komunitas lokal, ini bisa menjadi agen perubahan untuk kita ngomongin transisi energi berkeadilan. Bukan hanya sebagai korban perubahan iklim, tapi juga kita bisa memberdayakan mereka. Mereka bisa sebagai partisipasi, mereka bisa dikasih akses, mereka bisa diberikan kesempatan untuk sebagai agen perubahan. Bisa diajak untuk dilatih, kemudian diberikan pendampingan, dengan tentu akses yang sama setara. Kita tidak membedakan secara jenis kelamin, secara kelompok rentannya, sehingga agen perubahannya itu, karena dengan agen perubahan itu menjadi penting ketika mengambil keputusan pada setiap tahap pengembangan proyek. Nah, kalau ngomongin tentang gender atau inklusi sosial itu sebenarnya kalau ngomong ke implementasi itu adalah tujuannya ya. Sedangkan inisiatif untuk pengaruh utamaan dan inisiatif spesifik terkait dengan GESI atau gender dan inklusi sosial itu adalah strategi untuk mencapai tujuan tersebut. Jadi itu yang mungkin bisa saya sampaikan terkait perspektif kesetaraan gender, inklusi sosial, kelompok rentan, posisi mereka yang bisa dijadikan sebagai keberlanjutan dan keberadilan atau kesetaraan untuk ngomongin tentang energi transisi energi berkeadilan ini itu adalah tugas yang bisa kita lakukan dengan memberdayakan mereka tanpa harus membeda-bedakan, tanpa harus melihat dari kelompok mana, dan ketika mereka mendapat akses dan bisa berpartisipasi dengan sama, dengan setara, itu tampaknya untuk kita memberikan pengaruh utamaan atau masukan terkait dengan inklusi sosial, terkait dengan gender, itu bisa kita lakukan bersama. Begitu Mbak tanggapan dari saya. Mungkin ada peserta yang mau bertanya. Itu dari saya. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Dante, for bringing out this subject of gender inclusion and looking at how the just energy transition is really relevant and practical in addressing these issues. So we get into our next session of discussions, and we have quite a number of questions on our Q&A, page. So I'm going to get to them, but generally, just to warm up the panelists, I think I'll pick it up from where Dante left, and I think I'll just give each panelist a minute to just help us generally understand how do we get just energy transition happening, especially in the global south, in developing countries, and meeting and actually touching and impacting the lives of the most vulnerable. Because when it comes to accountability, when it comes to the numbers, most of our governments and most of the people who are demonstrating their efforts will talk big numbers. We've reduced emission reductions by this percentage. What is happening? How do we ensure that just energy transition affects positively the microeconomy at community level? What are the two things that are most important for us to consider? I will start with you, Dr. Soni.
Thank you, Kevin. This is a very interesting question. I'm not sure whether I can answer that in the sense that it is addressing a very micro scale, even at household. But I think the framework that that UNDP and partners are developing for Indonesia looks at different scale. So we have national, subnational, down even to project or asset level scale. And these all scales have different impacts. What I'm trying to say is, even when we talk about household or village or community level, these are not immune or can be separated from other dynamics at different scales. For example, when we talk about social protections, these are funded by public finance from different, from national level. We also, in the case of Indonesia, we also have village fund and so on and so forth. And these, when it's combined with, say, I'm thinking of something like just energy transition bonds, for example, something newly created to address this issue and distributed or aiming very specific to village level or household level or biogas, thematic areas, related thematic areas. So things will be different. Again, there are different attacking points, so to say, to intervene. I'm fully aware of the very scale of biogas, but these are not, or these cannot be separated from other constellations. Now, putting back into the just energy transition partnership, there have been numbers about this. I think we know it since even from the G20 that Indonesia hosted last year. But these numbers still need to be also put in alignment with other roles that other stakeholders can also, chip in and deliver. And that's important to talk thematic areas like biogas into these whole constellations. To be very honest, the amount is not really, a lot if you want to address the energy transition issues. And even, one investment area is already taking up a lot of funding. So I think we need to really think more serious about the different roles that different stakeholders can play. so that we are able to look at, how can we address, or what kind of programs can be addressed for biogas, for example, but also the roles of stakeholders. And I'm not speaking of only funding. We can also talk about technical assistance. We can also talk about policy innovations, regulation that are already existing but not really delivering. We can probably, make it better. Or when it comes to funding, probably there have been some funding for social protection. We may want to consider, like tweaking it into poverty related, but strongly related to biogas intervention, for example. This will be having a different impact that I can imagine. But this is something to be explored. Yeah. Sorry, it's a bit too long, but that's more or less what I can imagine at the moment.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sonia. I want to bring in Muvule and Mikel on this, because you talked about how do we, highlight or magnify the opportunities that biogas can bring in, to the just energy transition. I think, Mikel, I want to ask you, what are these areas that you think should be considered for investment, for intervention, whether it's at technical level or financing level, that are already ready for a multiplier effect in terms of impact at community level, that policymakers, players, different stakeholders in the just energy transition should be looking at?
All right, thank you, Kevin. No, it's a very good question, because, like I said, we're looking at what impact can a smallholder farmer or an average person in the community make in this biogas transition. And what we are realizing is that with the knowledge that we are able to, that we have gained, let's say in Uganda, for example, just in the last 5 to 10 years, we are now at a place where, with the right kind of investment, we can now develop biogas systems that can work whether at community level or at small industry scale level. These can be developed, installed, maintained, and operated by local technicians with the right kind of support structures. And that way they're sustainable, because now they're owned by the communities, and they are and they are directly contributing to the benefit and the improvements of the quality of life in those communities. So we see a lot of opportunity. Right now we are involved in working in different refugee settlements, where we're seeing that collecting all the waste from those refugee settlements, we are now able to, theoretically, we are able to supply enough energy to the refugee settlements that they don't need to create huge burdens on the natural resources in terms of looking for energy. We see a big challenge we have here in Uganda is we have all these international agencies that are supporting refugee communities by providing food, housing, shelter, but they're not providing energy to cook that food. So the refugee communities are going out and destroying the natural resources that they have. And it's also now leading to hotter, to climate effects. But the beauty about biogas is that, one, it's, like I said, it's a simple technology. It's low cost at certain scales. And with even small investments in terms of education and technical abilities, we're able to see we can create poverty reduction. We can have multiplier effects in terms of industries that can use alternative forms of energy now, whether it's as to drive agricultural equipment, or in terms of just producing organic fertilizer to improve crop yields. So
thank you so much.
We see that those are the key areas that we think we could have a big impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mikel. And to bring that to perspective, I would want to, and I'll come to you, Dr. Charles, but to bring that to perspective, I would want to bring in our next responder, who is Antonius, to just also highlight and just delve deeper on the community effort towards just energy transition. Antonius, please.
Oke, terima kasih. Saya dalam bahasa Indonesia. Jadi kami adalah komunitas kooperatif yang menggerakkan masyarakat yang memang berhadapan langsung dengan masyarakat ya, cukup sulit juga mengubah pola pikir dan kebiasaan. Kami beranggotakan 47.000 anggota di Sulawesi Selatan Indonesia, dan soal SDGs, pertanian terpadu, pupuk organik sampai bioseluri tadi itu kami sudah pelajari semuanya. Dan kami sudah bekerja sama termasuk dengan Yayasan Rumah Energi untuk mengajak masyarakat beralih dari konvensional ke biogas ini. Sayang bahwa memang di tahun 2022 kami mencoba untuk mengajak masyarakat, memang SDM merubah pikiran dan perilaku masyarakat tidak gampang. Ya. Kalau soal pembiayaan, mereka punya modal di koperasi, tinggal pinjam 6 jutaan, lalu kita buat instalasi. Tapi memang di tahun yang lalu itu kami pikir kami belum berhasil dengan baik, karena memang pendidikan kepada masyarakat ini susah-susah gampang, karena di daerah kami ini mereka lebih memilih yang gampang, yang cepat, yang masif. Itu ratusan hektar tanaman padi kami ajak untuk beralih ke organik dan seterusnya. Memang tantangannya berat sekali. Jadi kami mengakui sebagai pelaku di lapangan susah sekali. Tapi kami berusaha semaksimal mungkin mempelajari juga asset-based community development tentang pengorganisasian komunitas masyarakat, sehingga di tahun 2023 ini sampai 2027 kami memproyeksikan ada 30 instalasi biogas yang akan kami buat di tengah masyarakat. Lalu juga di tahun 2023 ini kami sudah punya tagline Green Kooperatif mendukung SDGs ini soal transisi energi, dan ada sekitar 370 panel surya yang akan kita mulai sampai 5 tahun ke depan. Itu tentu kami akan berkomitmen ini betul-betul kami teorinya ini sudah sering kami dengar ini SDGs dan seterusnya, tetapi ya susahnya di situ adalah pemberdayaan masyarakat, mengubah pola pikir masyarakat tidak gampang. Dan kami sadari sebagai pelaku di lapangan itu ada 380 mentor kami di lapangan, memang itu susah-susah, agak sulit mengubah pola pikir dengan teknologi yang masif menghasilkan beras yang dalam jumlah berton-ton. Itu mereka lebih memilih dengan pupuk kimia dan seterusnya. Tapi kami pelajari bersama Yayasan Rumah Energi soal bioseluri dan memang bagus ya, dampak ekonomi yang luas itu bagus, tapi butuh waktu. Kami butuh waktu untuk mengubah pikiran masyarakat. Demikian.
Thank you so much for that highlight, and looking at what is the place of the community, what opportunities are presented to communities, and how are they opportunities or barriers? Can communities really respond to what financiers, development partners are looking for? I think I will get straight to our questions. We have quite a number of questions. And before we go there, I would want to welcome Charles. There's a question here. Someone is asking, how does the just energy transition fit with the global methane pledge? How does the just energy transition framework fit within the global methane pledge? I believe you're also referring to our NDCs and our commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions as parties. You're on mute, Charles.
All right, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. Kevin, I think the Global Methane Pledge is one of the newest pledges and commitments towards methane abatement globally, led by the US and then the EU. And a key component of the pledge is really to collectively reduce anthropogenic methane emissions across other sectors by at least 30%. Across many developing countries, we see the contribution of waste and landfills to methane emissions, and especially for countries that are not oil rich or that do not really produce a lot of oil and gas. The contribution of agric and then waste sectors to methane emissions is very huge. And it means that waste reduction through the transformation of those waste to energy sources will be very important in ensuring that methane emissions can be abated. And that is where biogas becomes very important within this space of things, because then it means that you are converting the biogas or the methane, which would have been exposed to the atmosphere through various forms of emissions, now into a more economically feasible or commercialized approach, a commercialized commodity that would provide more economic value. And so the biogas is very important in converting waste, in converting agric waste that would have been released into the atmosphere into a more commercial value. And we need to provide the necessary technologies in doing that. So probably to answer the question on that, it squarely fits within the global methane pledge. And for developing countries and for non-resource oil and gas rich countries, perhaps looking at the methane abatement through the waste and then the agric sector, and how we can convert some of these waste into efficient and effective biogas systems could be very beneficial to generate both economic value and also to reduce our methane emissions footprints.
Thank you so much, Charles. And back to you again, Dr. Soni. There is this concern that we need to have a clear definition of just, and of course, a clear definition of energy transition. What do these two terms really mean? And of course, looking at it in the context of both the global south and the global north. What is considered just in the north might not necessarily be what is interpreted as just in the south. And energy transition in the north would not be the same as what would be the transition in the south. So the question is that, is this being discussed at international, at the international level? Is this a subject that is being discussed at the international level? And are the international partners aware of the fact that most energy in sub-Saharan Africa is used for cooking, when you talk about biomass, use. So how do we, bring this conversation on the table at international and global level?
Sorry, is it addressed to me, Kevin, just to make sure?
Yes, it's addressed to you.
Thank you very much, just to make sure. I'm not saying that it is being discussed at the moment, but I think to some degree it is already part of the conversation. Why I'm saying this is because if we look at the proposed definition, for example, there one can see there's some extension.
I think you are muted.
We can hear him. I can hear you.
Am I muted? No.
I can hear you, Dr. Soni. You can continue.
Oh, okay. So let me continue. So we are if we look at the proposed definition, we see some features that it is extended, For example, definition of stakeholders, the approach to what is considered being just. These are more or less extended compared to what has been there for in the existing, a definition of just transition. So I think there are some consideration of the national or even South context here. And in the case of Indonesia, for example, the notion that Indonesia really want to escape what has been called the middle income trap is a very strong in defining the conversation about just energy transition. This is a key policy outcomes when it comes to just energy transition. One cannot, stay away from these key point on middle income trap when it comes to Indonesia. I'm sure there are some very specific emphases for India or other countries in the global south too about defining just energy transition. Uh, by saying that, I think it's also reflect on how it negotiate, with partners from the global north when it comes to just energy transition. Now, if we also look at the investment areas, I'm not sure whether it's only addressing the electrification issue. I think it goes a bit beyond, at least in the case of Indonesia, goes beyond electrification. We we think about other issues, but I think yes, some of the issue related to biogas need to be part of the conversation more. But I believe that there's still room, to have this discussion into the existing ones. Yeah, and it's also good to have this discussion today. Try to bring some innovation at scale, at the community household level. That might also add into the way we approach just transition in Indonesia and elsewhere.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sonny. And this is to you, Mikhail. There's a question that seeks your intervention. How do we scale and accelerate biogas deployment in the global south? And this is looked at as a significant solution for energy transition globally. So how do we scale based on your experience in deploying the technology in Uganda?
Thank you, Kevin.
Mikhail.
And that's a very good question. So our experience has been that as long as we can elaborate the business case, we need to be able to show what are the benefits that somebody is getting by adopting biogas. So if it's just, we start off with household savings on fuel. Then we move to educating people about the improved or additional income that they can generate from higher crop productivity, better yields, and higher sustainability or resilience to climate change in agricultural production. Then we move to the areas of educating people about the community benefits in terms of improved climate forecasts because of reduced deforestation. And then that's at the domestic level, but we're also seeing big opportunities at small scale industry and small and medium scale industry right now, where adoption of biogas makes sense because any industry that's producing waste has a large amount of their operating budget devoted to getting rid of that waste. Now imagine if they could turn that waste into a resource that is then fed back into their organization and used to improve their productivity, improve their circularity, integrated economics. So I think that we need to approach this from a systematic system of education, sensitization, awareness, and then practical demonstration. So we can start with a few domestic and small-scale industries. When we see how they're producing, we educate more people about that, and we bring them on board based on the benefit that they get as individual operators, whether it's as an enterprise or as a smallholder farmer. That, I think, is the biggest driver, because usually small-scale farmers are not so interested in the global scale. They want to know, how does this benefit me and my family or my community? And if we can start from there, I think that adoption becomes a lot easier, because the business case is there, as well as the case for the environment and the overall productivity of what they're doing. But at the same time, it also impacts, as they improve their livelihoods, as they improve their incomes, they also move up on that ladder of a just energy transition. So they're part of that transition based on the benefits that they're actually receiving. So it becomes a practical way to disseminate this technology and this information based on the improvements to people's livelihoods. And I think that's the way we need to promote it.
Thank you so much, Mik. Thank you so much, Mikhail. At this point, I also want to bring in Dr. Charles, and I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes to first respond briefly on this question, as you also give your final remarks. So there's a question here that begs, how do we synergize our advocacy for both direct energy use as biogas, such as biogas, which are smaller in scale, the small scale, energy solutions, and the advocacy on transition to renewables in large power systems. So how do we balance, interventions that are so critical for small scale, users, and also the large, renewables power systems? Please, Dr. Charles.
All right, thank you, Kelvin. I think it's an issue of recognizing who the beneficiaries are, and that is very important in this regard. If we do a good mapping of who the beneficiaries are for us, we would know where perhaps solar deployment will be necessary, and we know where biogas will be necessary for us. It also has to do with a lot of identifying the strength and then the potential for the resource to be generated. For instance, if you are dealing with biogas, you'll be looking at where we can source the very quality feedstock, the very quality raw material that will be beneficial in providing the gas. The second part is, if you're thinking of solar, then you're looking at where there is a good solar irradiation potential. So when we're able to do this mapping of beneficiary of needs, then we'll be able to tailor the energy needs to it. And as the previous speaker mentioned, we need to start from somewhere. We need to perhaps begin from bottom up. And once we begin to do that, we'll be able to see and assess where the needs are, where the challenges are, and then we can begin to curtail these challenges whilst scaling up. So it also relies on, bringing all of these together relies on how policy can address these things. And our policy on energy, as we've all said, goes beyond, goes beyond electrification. We need to look at what really we are using our energy for. The issues of clean cooking, the issues of agriculture utilization, the issues of industrialization. These are all serious areas that drive a lot of energy utilization. So a good understanding of what the transition means for us is very, very important in this regard. And that will help us to know which technologies to develop and at what scale those technologies can be developed, so that we don't necessarily have to follow, blindly in a way that may not even be beneficial for us. So probably to end, what I'll just say is that yes, energy transition is real. It is happening, but the thinking around it needs to be differentiated, and we need to link it up with the issues of economic development and poverty reduction, and that brings, within the justice potential and the justice framework around it. And once we're able to do that, we can bring out the key technologies and the key approaches that helps us to go beyond just the reduction of emissions to also ensure commercialization and also to bring some level of economic benefits.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles, for that very succinct response to that. I will now invite Mikel to give his final remarks. And as you give your final remarks in 1.5 minutes, just also mention about the potential of digitalizing the biogas value chain, and at what point is the biogas value chain potent for digitalizing and of course integrating artificial intelligence.
Yes, thank you. So yes, I'm of course honored to have been part of this discussion today. And so I wanted to end with just kind of wrapping up some of the areas on the practical applications for us in the biogas value chains. We see a huge opportunity to drive demand because it's needed for our situations where we have a lot of energy poverty. We need to see how we can improve the ability to develop the skills on the ground, and we can convert that directly to poverty reduction because we will be having a direct improvement in the quality of life and the livelihoods of the communities and the people we touch. But the missing link, especially in our developing countries like right now, is the ability to garner and secure the right kind of biogas investments. So we want to see investments that we can use to develop the basic technologies, but with the idea of scaling them with time so that we can have a bigger impact. Now, I think when we scale, that is where we see the ability to digitize. We're seeing the ability now to use smart meters, which are able to meter and to monitor. I see a big opportunity in the digitalization of biogas systems in terms of carbon reporting and carbon monitoring, which is very important to organizations like the Indonesian Biogas Program. I'm sure in Kenya and Uganda biogas programs, we need to drive down the costs of running these programs so that there's more carbon finance available from the savings we get through using artificial intelligence and digitization, so that we can transfer more benefits of the carbon finance to the stakeholders in the JET, especially the stakeholders at the bottom of the economic pyramid, so to speak. So I think in short, that's my summary, and that's where I see digitization coming in is a way to lower costs, but also improve the integrity and accuracy of the data that we collect, and that we can then present and market as we trade in carbon credits and carbon offsets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mikel. Now we are going full circle. We started with Dr. Soni. I think we are ending this session again with Dr. Soni with your final remarks. As you give your final remarks in 1.5 minutes, please also respond this question that is talking about what kind of roadmap and ecosystem would you suggest to support bioenergy technology knowledge for rural environment, especially in Indonesia?
Thank you, Kevin. I think I'm not going to propose specific roadmap for in the very context of biogas. I'm sure friends and colleagues from Rumah Energi probably knows better than myself. I've been relatively dealing with, somewhat broader and general across all energy thematics and subsectors when it comes to just energy transition. So I'm sure there will be better ideas on the roadmap. But if I may comment, and it's also related to one of the questions, at least we try to talk about and try to have a definition on what just in the just energy transition is, this is needed at the moment because, at least from the exercise we are doing now, it seems that different people have a different imagination about just. So, and we know that this is a very contested issue when it comes to energy. There are different stakeholders. We believe there are different imagination on this. So we need to sit and keep having this conversation and agree. I'm not saying it's in full agreement. There will be no full agreement, but at least there is some degree of agreed definition. Once we have it, and then we try to operationalize it into, programs, role, enabling condition, to what have you, and so on, right? Because if we do not have this definition, or at least some shared definition, I think we will not go anywhere. Or if we go anywhere, we'll be in a very different directions. So it's not enough for a roadmap, but I hope that will be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soni. It has been a really insightful, informative, very deep discussion sessions around what just energy transitions means in the, biogas sector context. At this particular time, I will invite us to another Slido session. We are about to close the webinar. And as we close, I would invite us to another Slido session where we're going to also appreciate what are these insights that we have already, we are taking home as participants. How have we appreciated the session? So I would invite the technical team to just put up the Slido on the screen. We encourage as many of us as possible to engage in the Slido. So the first question is, which aspect do you think is the most important to be addressed for a just energy transition right now? So this is simple because you just choose on the options that you feel is important. You can use the QR code to log in, or you can. Thank you so much. I can see many people are responding. A lot of people looking at green and fair investment as an important aspect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we can go to the next question. Which aspects of biogas value chain needs to be enhanced to contribute in just energy transition? So what is this in biogas value chain that needs to be enhanced to contribute in just energy transition? Thank you so much. We have financing, we have policy, we have partnerships and collaborative work, information and knowledge sharing, and technology. Quite a number of people responding. Thank you so much. Partnerships and collaborative work is a lot important in the value chain to enhance just energy transition. The other question is, how important do you think biogas and its value chains are? How is biogas and its value chains important to just energy transition? So it's a Likert scale. So if it's not really important, you select 1. If you think it's really, really very, very important, select 5. If it's in between, have the options. Thank you so much. I can see quite a number of us are responding. Thank you so much. how relevant is the grassroots community in just energy transition? Talking about community, how relevant are the communities at the grassroots level to just energy transition? Also, thank you so much. I can see many people are responding. And indeed, many are agreeing that communities are relevant and they're important in driving the just energy transition agenda. Wonderful. Thank you so much to all participants. Thank you to all our panelists for the very insightful, well-prepared, interventions on our subject matter of the day. I do believe that all of us as participants have really gotten, insights from this particular discussion. And from me, I would want to give back, the stage to our MC to help us wrap up. Thank you to all who have been with me. I would like to recognize Dr. Soni, Dr. Charles, Mikel Muvule, who were our speakers and our panelists. I also want to appreciate Dante and Antonius for helping us in responding to the sessions. Thank you so much, and over to you, Master of Ceremony.
Thank you, Kevin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your engagement in our study session. As we come to the end of this insightful voyage, representing the South Biogas community, our esteemed speakers and our panelists, and our dedicated team, we would like to express our gratitude to each and every one of you for your active participation and engagement. Later on, we will distribute presentation materials from our resourceful panelists to the email you use for the Zoom webinar registration. Thank you and see you at the next event. Okay, for the last session, please, for the speakers and panelists, we can take a picture together. Please turn on your camera, Mr. Charles, Pak Anton. Okay. I will count in 3. Please smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, once again, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin,
Have a great
Charles,
day. Thank you very
Michelle,
much.
teman-teman Rumah
Thank you
Energi,
so
Mbak Dantri.
much.
Izin pamit ya.
Ya, saya pamit. Terima kasih. Selamat sore.